The rain fell on Veridia City not as a cleansing force, but as an indictment. It hammered against the panoramic windows of Alistair Finch's penthouse, each drop, a tiny fist pounding on the invisible barrier that separated him from the world he had abandoned. 45 floors below the city's lights bled into shimmering, distorted rivers, a spectacle of life and motion that felt as alien to him as a distant galaxy. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the climate-controlled air and the storm's muffled rage. The space was less a home and more a monument to absence. Polished chrome and stark white surfaces reflected a man who was himself, a reflection, a ghost haunting the life he had built. Alistair stood before the window, a tall, gaunt figure in a simple gray shirt and dark trousers, his reflection staring back with eyes that had seen too much and now chose to see nothing at all. The memory came as it always did in the rain. It wasn't a gentle recollection. It was an assault. The frantic beep of a failing heart monitor, the slick, warm feel of surgical gloves, the metallic tang of blood overwhelming the sterile scent of antiseptic. He could almost feel the weight of the surgical tools in his hands, the desperate, calculated movements of a man trying to outrun death. And then the face. Young, full of a life that was slipping through his fingers like sand, a soldier whose name he could never forget but would never speak aloud. The final damning sound of the flatline was a permanent echo in the quietest chambers of his soul. He had been Dr. Alistair Finch, the finest trauma surgeon the military had ever produced, a man who could piece together shattered bodies on the edge of the world. Now he was just Alistair, a name attached to a series of lucrative medical patents that funded this self-imposed exile. He had surrounded himself with the most advanced medical technology. Money could buy a private clinic within his home that could rival any hospital's ICU, yet he hadn't touched a patient in 5 years. He was a master healer who could not heal himself. A sharp digital chime, clean and piercing, shattered his reverie. It was the security system, an almost unheard-of intrusion. On the wall, a section of the plasterboard became translucent, revealing a holographic layout of the penthouse. A single red dot pulsed in the east wing. The pharmacy. His first reaction was not fear but a profound weariness. Even here in his sterile sanctuary, the world insisted on intruding. He moved with a quiet, efficient grace that spoke of his past. His steps were silent on the cold marble floor as he bypassed the main living area, taking a service corridor that ran behind the minimalist art displays. He was not a man who startled easily. He had operated under artillery fire. A common burglar was little more than an annoyance. The pharmacy was a vault of glass and steel, every shelf perfectly organized, every vial and box a testament to order and control. And in the center of it all was the source of the breach. The figure was small, hunched over a refrigerated unit, its silhouette haloed by the soft blue light from within. Alistair stopped in the doorway, a shadow in the darkness, observing. "You will find nothing of monetary value here," he said, his voice calm, clinical, the voice he once used to deliver grim prognoses. "The narcotics are in a biometric safe you cannot possibly bypass." The figure froze, then straightened slowly. It was a child. A girl soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her skull, her clothes little more than rags. In her hand she clutched a small clear vial containing a pale opalescent liquid. Her eyes wide and dark and her thin face fixed on him. They held no fear. Only a desperate, ferocious determination that was shockingly out of place. He took a step forward and she took a step back, her knuckles white around the vial. "I'm not here for drugs," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I need this. It's for my brother. He's sick." Alistair's gaze fell to the vial. He recognized it instantly. VX7, an experimental antiviral agent he had developed years ago. Extremely potent, extremely rare, and certainly not something a child should know about, let alone steal. "That is not a cure for the common cold," he stated, his tone unwavering. "Improperly administered, it is a poison. I know what it is." She shot back, her small body radiating defiance. "And I know it's the only thing that can help him. The fever. He can't breathe right. Please." The word was a crack in her armor, a brief glimpse of the terrified child beneath the warrior. I'll pay you back. I swear." A flicker of something akin to dark amusement crossed Alistair's face. "Pay me back, child. That vial in your hand is worth more than the building you likely live in." He expected tears. He expected her to drop the vial and run. He did not expect her to take another step toward him, her chin held high. Her eyes burned with an intensity that he had only ever seen on the battlefield in the moments before a final, desperate charge. "Then I will work for you. I'll clean this whole place every day for the rest of my life if I have to," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. She took another breath, and the next words she spoke struck him with the force of a physical blow. "Save my brother. Just save him. Then you can have anything. I'll pay you back. With anything. Anything." The word hung in the sterile air between them. It was the currency of the truly desperate, an offer of everything from someone who had nothing. In that moment, she was not a thief. She was not a child. She was a raw, unfiltered expression of the will to live, the will to protect. She was every desperate plea he had ever heard over the scream of incoming mortars, every promise whispered by a dying soldier for one more message home. The ghost in his memory stirred. The face of the young man on the operating table, his life extinguished, despite all of Alistair's skill, faded. In its place, he saw this girl, this small, fierce creature, offering her entire existence for the life of her brother. For 5 years he had been running from the responsibility of holding a life in his hands, and now a child had broken into his fortress not to take from him, but to demand he remember who he was. His own sterile, controlled world suddenly felt like a coward's tomb. He had the knowledge, the tools, the resources to change fates, and he had let them gather dust while he nursed his own wounds. The girl's plea wasn't just about her brother. It was a challenge thrown directly at the heart of his guilt. Slowly, deliberately, Alistair lowered the hand that had been reaching for the silent alarm on his wrist communicator. He looked at the girl truly, looked at her, and saw not an intruder, but a messenger. He turned without a word and walked to a steel cabinet. It hissed open at his touch, revealing a black reinforced medical bag. It was the same one he had carried through war zones, still stocked, still ready. He picked it up. The familiar weight was both a comfort and a burden. He turned back to the girl who watched him with wide, unblinking eyes, still clutching the precious vial. "The clock is ticking," Alistair said, his voice no longer just clinical but imbued with a long-forgotten urgency. "You have what you came for. Now lead the way." The girl Alara stared at him for a heartbeat, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. Then she nodded once, a sharp, determined gesture. She turned and ran for the service entrance she'd used to break in a small, fleeting shadow in the vast, empty perfection of his home. Alistair followed her. He walked past the monitors displaying his vast fortune, past the art that was worth millions, past the life he had so carefully constructed to feel nothing. He walked toward the door, toward the storm, and toward the promise of a child who had offered him the one thing he thought he had lost forever, a reason to fight. The journey from Alistair's sterile tower to Alara's world was a descent, not just in altitude, but through the very layers of civilization. The sleek automated vehicle that carried him through the city's gleaming arteries deposited him at the edge of the industrial district, a place the city maps preferred to forget. The moment he stepped out, the air changed. The rain here tasted of rust and chemical residue. He sent the car away, a silent black ghost, disappearing back toward a world of clean lines and quiet order. Alara was waiting for him under the flickering neon sign of a derelict pawn shop, a small, determined figure against the urban decay. She didn't speak, only gave a slight nod before darting into a labyrinth of narrow, garbage-strewn alleys. Alistair followed his expensive leather shoes, so at home on polished marble felt clumsy and loud on the broken concrete. This was her territory. She moved with a fluid, silent confidence, her small frame navigating the treacherous landscape as if born to it. For Alistair, it was a disorienting echo of moving through ruined cities in foreign war zones, the key difference being the enemy here was not a soldier, but poverty, neglect, and a danger he had yet to name. They finally stopped before a colossal skeletal structure that had once been a textile mill. Its windows were shattered teeth in a rusting iron jaw, and graffiti covered its brick skin like tattooed scars. Alara slipped through a gap in the corrugated steel fence, and Alistair followed his coat, snagging on a shard of metal. Inside the warehouse was a cavern of shadows and echoes. The vast space was filled with the ghosts of forgotten industry, hulking, silent machines draped in cobwebs, their forms barely visible in the gloom. The rain dripped through holes in the high vaulted ceiling, creating a mournful percussive rhythm that was the building's only heartbeat. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete mildew and something else, the faint, sweet scent of decay. But in one far corner, a small island of life pushed back against the encroaching darkness. A single battery-powered lantern cast a pool of warm yellow light on a makeshift camp. A thin mattress lay on a raised wooden pallet, covered with a patchwork of worn blankets. Beside it, a small stack of books, their spines soft with use, and a crate that served as a table. It was a pathetic sanctuary, yet it was defended with a fierce, desperate love. As they stepped into the light, a figure emerged from the shadows behind the camp. It was a woman moving with the coiled tension of a cornered predator. She was thin, her face etched with exhaustion, and a defiant intelligence, her dark hair pulled back in a messy knot. In her hand, she held a heavy iron pipe, gripping it not like a tool, but like a weapon. Her eyes, the same intense dark eyes as her daughter, were fixed on Alistair. "Alara, get behind me," she commanded, her voice a low, dangerous rasp. "Who is this? What have you done?" "Mama, it's okay," Alara said quickly, rushing to her side. "He's a doctor. I went to get the medicine. He found me. He came to help." The woman's gaze swept over Alistair, taking in his expensive clothes, his clean hands, the professional calm on his face. Nothing she saw seemed to reassure her. In her world, men like him did not simply help. Kindness was a transaction, and she knew she had nothing to offer in payment. "Help!" she sneered, the sound brittle. "People like him don't help. They take. What do you want?" she directed at Alistair, her knuckles white on the pipe. Alistair ignored the weapon, his attention drawn to a small form huddled under the blankets on the mattress. He could hear the child's breathing even from a distance, a shallow, rasping struggle. He set his medical bag down, the click of the latches loud in the cavernous silence. "What I want," he said, his voice even and devoid of emotion, "is to examine my patient. Your daughter made me a promise. I am here to fulfill my part of the bargain." He moved toward the mattress, his steps measured and non-threatening. The woman Serafina tensed, but Alara put a hand on her arm. "Please, Mama. Leo's worse." That was all it took. The fight in Serafina's posture sagged, replaced by a wave of raw fear. She stepped aside, a silent, tormented guardian, granting him passage. Alistair knelt beside the boy. Leo was small for 5, his skin pale and clammy with a feverish sheen. His chest rose and fell with a rapid, labored effort, each breath a small, painful victory. Alistair's hands were gentle as he placed a digital stethoscope to the boy's chest, his eyes closing as he listened. The sounds were wrong. Not the telltale rattle of pneumonia or the wheeze of asthma, but a strange rhythmic clicking as if delicate crystals were forming and breaking with every breath. He took out a dermal scanner and passed it over the boy's forehead. The temperature was high, but it was the secondary readings that made his brows furrow. Cellular metabolism was erratic, and there was a faint energy signature he'd never encountered before. As he worked, he spoke in a low, continuous monologue, more for his own benefit than theirs, a habit from years of training residents in chaotic emergency rooms. Pupils are reactive but sluggish. Respiration is rapid and shallow, indicative of hypoxia. Tachycardia is present. Skin turgor is poor. He gently lifted the boy's eyelid. Then he saw it. For a fraction of a second in the dim lantern light, the boy's iris seemed to shimmer with a faint internal luminescence, a soft blue-green glow that was gone as soon as it appeared. He looked up at Serafina, who was watching his every move, her face a mask of terror and suspicion. "This is not a simple infection," he said, his professional curiosity momentarily eclipsing the danger of the situation. "What is his medical history? Has he been exposed to any unusual biological or chemical agents?" Serafina's face closed off. "He has a weak chest. He's always been sickly." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Alistair didn't press. Instead, he opened his bag and prepared an injection. "I am not giving him the VX7. Not yet. His system is too unstable. This is a broad-spectrum metabolic stabilizer with a hyper-oxygenating agent. It will ease his breathing and bring the fever down. It is a temporary measure." He administered the shot with practiced ease, his movements precise and efficient. He was back in his element, a man with a clear and definable problem to solve. For a few minutes, he was not the ghost in the penthouse. He was Dr. Finch again. As he worked, his senses, honed by years of battlefield triage, absorbed the details of their environment. He saw the two backpacks worn but neatly packed, leaning against the wall go-bags ready for an instant departure. He saw the frayed map of the city's sewer system tucked under the mattress. He noticed that Serafina never turned her back to the cavernous darkness of the warehouse, her head constantly tilting at the sound of the wind or the skittering of rats. This was not a home. It was a foxhole. Within 20 minutes, the medicine began to work. Leo's breathing eased, the desperate rasp softening into a steadier rhythm. The tension in his small body relaxed and he sank deeper into a true sleep. Serafina watched the transformation, the iron pipe now resting limply at her side. The raw hostility in her eyes had been replaced by a grudging, exhausted respect. She had seen competence, and it was a language she understood. Alistair packed his instruments away. The immediate crisis was over, but the larger problem filled the silence between them. He stood up, his tall frame seeming to press down on their small island of light. "He needs a sterile environment," Alistair said, his voice quiet but firm. "He requires constant monitoring and access to equipment you do not have. The stabilizer will wear off in 12 hours. The underlying condition will remain, and I suspect it will worsen." He looked directly at Serafina, his gaze piercing her defenses. "You are running from something. I do not know what it is, and at this moment I do not care. But your son is caught in the crossfire. Whatever you are doing, it is not enough to keep him safe." He picked up his bag. He could leave. He could walk back out into the rain, return to his silent tower, and let the world continue to crumble without him. He had done his part. But the image of the boy's shimmering eye and the raw courage in the girl's promise held him fast. "You cannot stay here," he said. "Let me help you. Not just the boy, all of you." He offered her a choice. Not just a way out of the damp, cold warehouse, but a way out of the immediate danger. It was an offer of trust into a life that had taught her trust was a fool's game. Serafina stared at him, the weight of her son's life and her hidden past pressing down on her, her silence a battlefield of doubt and desperation. Serafina's world had taught her that every choice was a trade, and the currency was always some form of freedom. She looked at her son, his breathing now a soft, steady rhythm instead of a desperate battle, and she looked at the tall, quiet stranger who had granted him this reprieve. The warehouse was a tomb waiting to happen. This man, whatever his motives, was offering a chance at life. The choice was no choice at all. "Where?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, the single word an admission of defeat and a prayer for hope. The journey was a blur of calculated discretion. There was no gleaming luxury car, but a nondescript utility vehicle that Alistair drove with a quiet focus, navigating the city's shadowed veins, avoiding major thoroughfares and surveillance hubs. Ilara sat pressed against the window, her eyes wide as the landscape shifted from urban decay to the clean, manicured anonymity of the city's affluent sectors. Serafina held a sleeping Leo, her body a rigid shield, her eyes scanning every intersection, every passing car for a threat that only she could see. Their destination was not a grand house, but a residential building of unassuming gray stone and tinted glass. They entered through a subterranean parking garage, taking a private elevator that opened directly into an apartment on the third sublevel. The moment the doors slid open, Ilara gasped. The space was bathed in a soft, warm light. It was not as vast or sterile as Alistair's penthouse, but it was a universe away from the warehouse. A deep, comfortable-looking sofa sat before a wall that was a digital screen currently displaying a serene forest scene. A small kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances and stocked cupboards. There were 2 bedrooms, the doors open, revealing beds with thick duvets and plump pillows. The air was clean, warm, and smelled faintly of lavender and ozone from the air purifier. For Ilara, it was magic. She ran to one of the beds, burying her face in a pillow with a sigh of pure bliss. She discovered the shower and its seemingly endless supply of hot water, the refrigerator full of food she'd only seen in magazines. For Leo, waking groggily in his mother's arms, it was the simple, profound comfort of warmth and quiet. But for Serafina, the place was a prison of velvet and steel. As Alistair brought in their few meager belongings, she moved through the apartment not with wonder, but with the methodical precision of a security expert assessing a new containment facility. She tested the locks on the main door, a complex series of electronic and physical bolts. She noted the lack of traditional windows. Instead, High-resolution screens displayed a live feed of an enclosed Japanese garden, beautiful and inescapable. There were cameras small and discreet in the main living areas. For Leo's monitoring, Alistair explained, gesturing to a medical suite he was setting up in the corner of the living room, complete with a cardiac monitor, an oxygen concentrator, and an IV drip stand. Serafina said nothing. She saw protection, but she also felt the chilling finality of a closing trap. This man's generosity was a weight, a debt she could never hope to repay, and that made him dangerous. Every clean towel, every meal, every moment of her children's safety was a chain binding her to him. The days that followed settled into a strange, tense domesticity. Alistair was a constant, quiet presence. He meticulously monitored Leo's condition, adjusting medications, drawing blood with a gentle expertise that belied his detached demeanor. He treated the boy not just as a patient, but with a quiet tenderness that Serafina found both unnerving and deeply moving. He would read to Alara from the apartment's digital library, patiently answering her endless, insightful questions about science and medicine. He was building a rapport with her children, forging a bond that Serafina felt powerless to stop. She watched him, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Gratitude was a bitter pill when swallowed with suspicion. She would find herself softening as she watched him make Alara laugh, only to harden again when she remembered the cameras, the locked doors, the fact that he now knew her deepest vulnerability. He was their keeper, and the cage was gilded, but it was a cage nonetheless. Meanwhile, in the silent hours after the children were asleep, Alistair retreated into his own world. In a small shielded office within the apartment, he waged a quiet war. He sat before a bank of monitors, his fingers flying across a holographic keyboard, delving into the darkest corners of the deep web. He called in markers from a life he had left behind, speaking in clipped coded language to contacts who existed only as encrypted voice signatures. He was hunting for the ghost of Dr. Serafina Volkov. The first breadcrumb was a heavily redacted Omnigen personnel file. Most of it was classified, but her list of publications was astonishing. She was a prodigy in theoretical genetics. Then he found a ghost of a news report, an internal corporate memo leaked, and then scrubbed from the net within hours, mentioning a Level 4 biohazard containment breach at Omnigen's primary research facility, followed by a lab-wide lockdown. The date matched the approximate time Serafina would have gone on the run. He cross-referenced facility staff manifests with public records. Dr. Serafina Volkov had simply ceased to exist after that date. No new address, no credit card activity, no digital footprint. She had become a ghost. He was beginning to understand the scale of the power he was confronting. Omnigen was not just a corporation. It was a sovereign entity with the power to erase people. Far across the city, in the highest spire of the Omnigen Tower, another hunt was beginning. Silas Thorne's office was the antithesis of Alistair's home. It was a realm of sharp angles, black glass, and cold blue light. He stood before a massive interactive screen displaying a web of data streams, a predator surveying his domain. "Report," he said, his voice soft but carrying an edge of absolute authority. A young nervous analyst stood at attention. "Sir, the algorithmic sweep flagged a procurement anomaly. A private purchase of 3 vials of cryostabilizer agent K-12. The purchaser was the Finch Medical Trust." Silas's expression did not change, but a flicker of interest ignited in his cold gray eyes. The stabilizer was a proprietary Omnigen compound, technically not on the public market. It was a binding agent necessary for the transport and storage of highly volatile biological materials. Materials like the one their most brilliant and most treacherous scientist had stolen. "Finch," Silas mused, tapping the name on the screen. A file expanded, displaying a photo of Alistair. Dr. Alistair Finch, former military, trauma surgeon of some renown. Left the service 5 years ago under a cloud of conjecture. Now a recluse living off a portfolio of patents. No known connection to our project. "We believe it's a coincidence, sir," the analyst offered. "The trust funds various independent researchers." Silas silenced him with a raised hand. He was a man who did not believe in coincidences. He believed in patterns and predators. He brought up another image on the screen, a corporate headshot of a woman with intelligent, defiant eyes. Dr. Serafina Volkov. He placed her picture next to Alistair's, the reclusive doctor and the missing scientist. The timing was too perfect. For a moment he was silent, his mind processing variables, constructing scenarios. Volkov was a ghost, but she had a weakness. 2 of them, in fact. her children, one of whom their intelligence suggested might have inherited a latent genetic instability, an instability that would require advanced and very specific medical intervention. "The analyst is mistaken," Silas said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is not a coincidence. This is a scent. He's helping her." He turned away from the screen, his reflection a stark silhouette against the city lights. He looked at the analyst, his eyes as devoid of warmth as the glass around them. "Put a discreet surveillance team on Dr. Finch. I want to know every person he communicates with, every package he receives, every kilobyte of data that moves in or out of his network. I want to know the brand of coffee he drinks and the time he goes to sleep." He paused, letting the weight of his command settle. She has stayed a ghost for 2 years. Now someone has given her shelter. Find the shelter and you will find our property. He is no longer just a wealthy doctor. He is a complication. Silas turned back to the screen, watching the two faces, the haunted doctor and the fugitive scientist, side by side. "And I do not tolerate complications." Back in the gilded cage, Serafina stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching the steady rise and fall of her children's chests in the soft glow of a nightlight. For the first time in 2 years, they were sleeping in real beds, safe from the cold and the rain. A wave of fierce, painful gratitude washed over her, and it terrified her more than any threat. She was safe for now, but she could feel it in the air, a subtle shift in pressure, the instinct of the hunted. The silence was ending. The hunter was turning his gaze in their direction. The illusion of peace shattered on a Tuesday. Alistair was observing Leo's cellular response on a monitor, a complex dance of red and blue indicators, when a silent alarm chimed on his private terminal. It was a digital tripwire, an algorithm he had embedded in the city's public surveillance network. A cluster of registered Omnigen corporate vehicles, their transponders officially logged as being in the financial district, were currently converging on the industrial sector, specifically on the derelict warehouse. "They're back!" he said, his voice a low hum that cut through the apartment's quiet atmosphere. Serafina, who was helping Alara with a math problem at the kitchen table, froze. "Who?" "Your former employers," Alistair stated, his eyes fixed on the screen where small red dots were forming a perimeter. "They are methodical. They're sweeping your last known location." He stood and walked to a panel near the door, his movements economical and swift. Initiating lockdown. With a series of soft hydraulic hisses, the apartment transformed. Heavy steel shutters, invisible within the walls, slid down over the screen windows, plunging the room into a secure twilight, lit only by the soft glow of the monitors. The gentle hum of the air purifier was replaced by the deeper thrum of a closed-circuit filtration system. The gilded cage had become a bunker. Alara's eyes were wide, but she didn't panic. She moved to her mother's side, her small hand finding Serafina's. Serafina herself was pale, her breath catching in her throat. She had lived with this fear for 2 years, but seeing it manifest, seeing this man's calm, practiced response to it, made it more terrifyingly real than ever before. Another alarm, this one more urgent, flashed on Alistair's screen. "They're closer than I thought," he said, a muscle tightening in his jaw. "One of their signals just jumped to this building's network grid. They're not just searching the warehouse. They've traced a digital echo here." He turned to them, his face grim. "They don't know which unit. Not yet. But they will begin a sweep. From this moment on, absolute silence. No running water, no unnecessary movement. Alara, you and Leo will stay in the interior bedroom, away from the outer walls. Serafina, I need you with me." His commands were not suggestions. They were the orders of a field commander, and Serafina, to her own surprise, found herself obeying without question. The time for doubt was over. The hunt had come to their door. For the next hour, they lived in a state of suspended animation. Alistair sat before his monitors, having seamlessly integrated his system with the building's security feeds. He watched as 2 men dressed in the gray coveralls of municipal technicians moved through the building's service levels. They carried devices that looked like network signal analyzers. They were professionals. "They're sweeping for anomalous energy signatures," Alistair whispered, pointing to a fluctuating wave pattern on his screen. "This apartment is shielded, but the medical equipment, my network, it creates a low-level ghost signal. If they get close enough, they'll find it." He worked rapidly, rerouting power, shutting down non-essential systems, cloaking their digital footprint behind layers of encrypted proxies. It was a silent, high-stakes chess match being played in the walls and wires of the building. Twice the technicians passed their floor, their devices sweeping across the hallway. Serafina held her breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She watched Alistair's face calm and focused, his eyes darting from one screen to another. He was not a doctor playing at tactics. He was a soldier in his element, and his calm was the only thing keeping her own terror at bay. He motioned for her to move to the far side of the room. Their scanner is passing along the north wall. The shielding is weakest there. She complied instantly, her feet silent on the soft rug. She could hear their muffled voices in the hall, the quiet crackle of their radios. It was the sound of her nightmares made real. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Alistair watched the technicians retreat to the lobby and leave the building. He remained at his post for another 20 minutes, watching them depart the area before he finally leaned back, the tension leaving his shoulders in a long, slow exhale. "They're gone," he announced. "They didn't find a strong enough signal to confirm. But this was a probe. They'll be back." He reactivated the main systems and the steel shutters retracted with a soft hiss, revealing the serene artificial garden once more. The bunker was a cage again, but the illusion of safety was gone forever. The silence that followed was heavier than the lockdown itself. Alara emerged from the bedroom, her face pale but composed, holding the hand of a sleepy Leo. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a cold, stark reality. Serafina finally looked at Alistair, her eyes dark with a pain that went beyond fear. "You see," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It never ends. They will never stop." "Then we will stop them," he replied simply. She shook her head, a bitter, broken laugh escaping her lips. "You don't understand what you're fighting. You think this is about stolen research. It's so much more than that." She walked to the center of the room, turning to face him fully, her arms wrapped around herself. The time for secrets was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her survival and the survival of her children now depended on this man's complete understanding of the truth. "It's called the Seraphim Protocol." She began, her voice gaining a strange clinical strength as she retreated into the familiar territory of her science. "I named it myself. It was supposed to be a miracle. A retrovirus designed to identify and repair damaged DNA. It could cure genetic diseases, reverse cellular decay, heal catastrophic injuries. It could have ended suffering. Alistair listened, his expression unreadable, his entire being focused on her words. "I was the lead geneticist," she continued. "I dedicated my life to it. But Omnigen's board men like Silas Thorne, they didn't see a cure. They saw a product. And then they saw a weapon." Her voice dropped, laced with disgust. "They realized that if you could program a virus to heal, you could also program it to do the opposite. To target specific genetic markers to attack a population while leaving another untouched. A silent, perfect weapon. They were going to sell it." She took a shuddering breath. "I couldn't let that happen. The night of the containment breach, there was no breach. I staged it. I created a diversion to wipe the central servers and escape with the only stable prototype. The alpha strain." She looked at her hands. "In my haste, a containment field wavered for less than a second. I was exposed to an unstable aerosolized beta version. I ran diagnostics on myself for weeks. I seemed fine. But I was a carrier. I didn't know it would have a teratogenic effect." She finally looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully on the sofa, and her scientific composure crumbled. His illness, the clicking in his lungs, the shimmer in his eyes. "It's the virus. My virus. It's trying to repair his DNA, but his system is too young, too fragile. It's rewriting him and it's tearing him apart in the process. The VX7 you have is the only thing that can stabilize the replication process." The confession hung in the air, breathtaking in its scope. This was not about corporate greed. It was about a threat to humanity, and her son was patient zero. Alistair was silent for a long time. He walked to the monitor displaying Leo's vitals, looking at the complex alien data. He finally turned back to her, and she saw in his eyes not fear or judgment, but a deep, resonant anger. It was an old anger, one he recognized from a lifetime ago. "I spent 7 years of my life on field hospital gurneys," he said, his voice low and hard as stone. I held organs in my hands and tried to piece together men who had been torn apart by weapons designed in clean corporate boardrooms just like Omnigen's. I watched the art of killing evolve, getting cleaner, more efficient, more profitable with every generation. He took a step closer to her, his gaze unwavering. They will not be allowed to turn the art of healing into their next product line. They will not take your miracle and twist it into another way to fill body bags. The ghost of the fallen soldier in his memory was no longer a specter of failure. It was a call to arms. This was the same war, just a different battlefield. The enemy was the same, those who would exploit life for power and profit. Serafina had tried to stop them and been cast out. He had tried to mend the damage they caused and had broken himself. But now they were together. They are not just hunting you anymore, Dr. Volkov. Alistair said, a new dangerous resolve hardening his voice. They are hunting us, and they are about to discover that we are not easy prey. In his sterile office overlooking the rain-swept city, Silas Thorne reviewed the report from the failed sweep. There was no frustration on his face, only a cold, analytical placidity. He was a master of asymmetrical warfare, and when a direct assault failed, he simply changed the battlefield. Our approach was crude, he said to the young analyst who stood stiffly before the desk. A frontal assault on a ghost, predictable. Dr. Finch is a man of considerable resources, and it would seem a past that taught him paranoia. We cannot force his hand with simple intimidation. He turned to the panoramic window, his hands clasped behind his back. We don't need to break down his door. We will make the entire world knock on it for us. We will isolate him, turn his own world against him. We will paint his sanctuary into a prison not with steel, but with public opinion. He began to dictate, his voice calm and precise, weaving a narrative with the skill of a master propagandist. Draft a press release. Internal leak source it to a concerned executive at Omnigen. Dr. Serafina Volkov, a brilliant but tragically unstable researcher. Mention a history of paranoid delusions. Frame her disappearance as a psychotic break. The material she stole is not a finished product, but a volatile, unpredictable pathogen. We are not the villains. We are the responsible stewards of public safety, desperately trying to avert a catastrophe she might unleash. He paused. Link the Finch Medical Trust to a recent inquiry about unstable biological agents. Don't accuse, just associate. Let the media do the rest. The first blow landed less than 24 hours later. It appeared as a breaking news alert that flashed across the main screen in the safe house, the bold red banner slicing through the serene forest scene. Omnigen whistleblower or bioterror threat. Fugitive scientist sought in theft of dangerous pathogen. Beneath the headline was Serafina's old corporate headshot. It was a photo from another life, a confident, smiling woman who no longer existed. Now that smile looked manic, sinister. She stared at her own face, twisted by the media's narrative into the mask of a monster, and felt a profound sense of violation. They had not only taken her life's work, they were now stealing her very identity. "Mama!" Elara's small voice trembled. She stood beside the sofa, looking from the screen to her mother's pale face. Why are they saying those things? Why are they lying? Before Serafina could answer, Alistair's private network, silent for days, began to buzz with a cascade of incoming calls. He ignored the first two, but the third displayed a name he could not disregard. Dr. Alaron Croft, his former mentor, and the current head of the Veridia Medical University. Alistair answered, his voice a flat, neutral tone. Alaron. Alistair, for God's sake, what is going on? Croft's voice was strained, a mixture of concern and exasperation. The board is in an uproar. Our phones have been ringing off the hook. Omnigen is one of our biggest benefactors. They're talking about a rogue scientist, a public health risk, and your trust's name has been mentioned. They're saying you may be unwittingly harboring a fugitive. The information you have received is inaccurate, Alistair stated. Is it? Croft pressed, his voice lowering. Listen to me. I covered for you when you left the service. I defended your decision to become a recluse. But this is different. You are playing with fire. This woman Volkov, they say she's dangerous. Whatever your connection is to her, sever it. Cooperate with Omnigen. For your own good. For the good of your reputation. Alistair was silent for a moment, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. His reputation, his legacy, the quiet, orderly world he had built, it was all being leveraged against him. He looked across the room at Serafina, who was now kneeling, holding Alara close, trying to shield her from the poison on the screen. He saw not the monster the world was being shown, but a brilliant, terrified mother fighting for her children. His choice was already made. My reputation is my own concern. Alaron. Alistair said, his voice dropping to a dangerously cold register. But thank you for reminding me who my friends are. He ended the call without waiting for a reply. He disabled the incoming call notifications. The outside world was now officially an enemy. He turned to face the room. The air was thick with fear and despair. Serafina looked broken. He's won, she whispered, her voice hollow. Silas has won. He's turned me into a plague. Where can we possibly run now? We don't run, Alistair said, walking towards her. He knelt so he was at her level, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were clear-focused, and for the first time she saw no trace of the haunted ghost in them. He was fully present, a commander taking control of the battlefield. This is not a physical fight anymore, he said, his voice intense but steady. It's information warfare. They have seized the narrative. Our job is to rip it from their hands. You are not a plague, Serafina. You are the cure, and they are the disease. We just need to prove it. He stood and gestured to his terminal. I am a strategist, not a geneticist. You have the truth locked away in your data. I need you to arm me with it. Walk me through everything. Every piece of research, every failed experiment, every projection. I need to understand the science as well as you do. Not to cure Leo, but to find the single undeniable piece of evidence that proves what the Seraphim Protocol truly is. We need to find the bullet for our gun. A flicker of the defiant scientist he'd first seen in her eyes returned. His resolve was a lifeline pulling her from the depths of her despair. For the next several hours, the dynamic in the room shifted. She was no longer the frightened fugitive, and he was no longer the benevolent protector. They were partners. She guided him through the labyrinth of her research, her voice growing stronger and more confident as she spoke of gene sequencing, protein folding, and viral replication vectors. Complex diagrams and lines of code filled the screens. Alistair listened with an unnerving focus, absorbing the complex information, his mind processing it not as a doctor, but as a tactician searching for a weakness in the enemy's armor. Here, she said, pointing to a complex molecular model. This is the key. The alpha strain has a unique biosignature, a synthetic protein marker that acts as a failsafe. It prevents uncontrolled replication. It's what makes it a tool for healing. The weaponized version, the one they were developing, required them to remove that marker. The data I have contains the simulation logs of them doing exactly that. It's the proof of their intent. He stared at the screen, a slow, cold smile touching his lips. And I imagine those logs are protected by a level of encryption that would make them impossible to present as evidence without the proper context. Exactly, she confirmed. To any outside observer, it just looks like abstract data. Only I can explain what it means. Then you are not just the curer, he said, looking at her with a newfound profound respect. You are also the weapon. The air between them crackled with a new intensity. It was the intimacy of two minds locking together in a shared, dangerous purpose. For a moment he saw past the frightened mother and saw the brilliant, courageous woman who had risked everything for her principles. And she saw past the reclusive billionaire and saw the steadfast, honorable soldier who had refused to abandon his post. He stood, his decision made. They control the news. They control the narrative. Any data we leak through conventional channels will be discredited as the ravings of a madwoman. We cannot fight them on their battlefield. He walked to his terminal and pulled up a single, heavily encrypted contact file. There was no picture, just a name. Marcus Vance. Who is that? Serafina asked, moving to stand beside him. Alistair looked at the name on the screen, his expression grim, tinged with the memory of old violence and shared survival. He's a journalist, the last of a dying breed. He operates in the shadows and has taken down men far more powerful than the CEO of Omnigen. He paused, then looked at her. Years ago, in a place I'd rather forget, I pulled him out of a situation that should have killed him. It's time to see if his memory is as sharp as his reputation. The message Alistair sent was not a call, but a single encrypted data packet fired into the digital ether. It contained no text, only a string of coordinates for a disused subway station and a timestamp for the following night. The file was named with a single word, Kandahar. It was a key to a lock of shared history, a memory of dust blood, and a debt that had never been settled. The reply came 6 hours later, equally brief. The ghosts of Afghanistan better be worth my time. Come alone. He won't agree to that. Serafina said, her arms crossed tightly as she read the message over Alistair's shoulder. He needs to meet you, not me. Alistair shook his head. He needs to see the truth. That isn't me. It's you. He trusts no one, especially not men like me who live in towers. But he has a weakness for a righteous fight. You are the righteous fight. He just doesn't know it yet. We both go. The following night, they descended into the city's forgotten depths. The North Line station had been decommissioned for decades, a silent tomb beneath the thrumming metropolis. The air was cold and smelled of ozone-damp concrete and the ghosts of a million hurried journeys. Flickering emergency lights cast long dancing shadows down the grimy tiled corridors. Serafina clutched the data slate containing a portion of her research, her knuckles white. Every echo, every drip of water from the vaulted ceiling sounded like an approaching footstep. He appeared as promised, a man who seemed to materialize from the shadows rather than walk out of them. Marcus Vance was in his late 50s with a face like a crumpled roadmap of hard living and a cynical glint in his eyes. He wore a rumpled trench coat that had seen better decades, and an unlit cigarette was perched habitually at the corner of his mouth. He looked at Alistair. Then his gaze shifted to Serafina, sharp and dismissive. I said, come alone, surgeon. Marcus said, his voice a gravelly rasp. Don't tell me you've taken up babysitting. This is not a social call, Marcus. Alistair said, his tone even. And this is Dr. Serafina Volkov. Marcus gave a short, humorless laugh. Ah, the monster of the week. I've read your press clippings, Doctor. Quite the villain. Stealing plagues, threatening the good God-fearing people of our fair city. You're a little short for a bioterrorist. And you're a little sober for a journalist. Serafina countered, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. The flash of surprise in Marcus's eyes told her she'd scored a minor victory. The debt is this, Alistair said, cutting to the chase. I need you to listen to her story. All of it. And then I need you to look at her evidence. If after that you still want to walk away, the debt is paid. For an hour in the cold, echoing silence of the dead station, Serafina spoke. She did not plead or embellish. She laid out the facts with the cold, irrefutable logic of a scientist presenting her thesis. She explained the Seraphim Protocol, its promise and its perversion. She detailed Omnigen's corporate structure, the greed of the board, the ruthless efficiency of Silas Thorne. Marcus listened, his cynical expression never wavering, his eyes never leaving her face. When she was finished, he was silent for a long moment. It's a good story. He finally said, his tone non-committal. But stories are cheap. The media is already telling one about you, and it's a bestseller. I don't have a story, Serafina replied, holding out the data slate. I have proof. He took the slate, his fingers expertly navigating the encrypted interface Alistair had prepared. He scanned the data, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the complex notations of genetic sequencing and simulation modeling. He might not have understood the science, but he understood the language of hidden data. This was not the work of a deranged fanatic. This was the work of a brilliant mind. Omnigen has the government in its pocket, he mused, looking up from the slate. They have a PR machine that can make black seem white. Even if this is all true printing, it would be career suicide, at best. I'm not asking you to print it, Alistair said. I'm asking you to help us find a way to make them show the world the truth themselves. Marcus looked from Alistair's determined face to Serafina's desperate, intelligent one. He sighed a long, weary sound and finally took the cigarette from his lips. That night in Kandahar, you stitched up my chest with nothing but a needle, a fishing line, and a bottle of cheap whiskey. You told me to use the extra time I had to do something that mattered. He looked at the data slate in his hand. Damn you, Alistair. This might actually matter. The alliance was forged. Their new base of operations was the antithesis of Alistair's safe house, the cluttered, book-lined basement of Marcus's brownstone apartment. It was a chaotic war room of old and new technology. A massive corkboard covered in notes and connected by a web of red string stood next to a bank of high-end servers Alistair had discreetly installed. The smell of old paper and brewing coffee replaced the sterile air of the bunker. The dynamic was tense, but effective. Marcus, with his deep-seated distrust of technology, insisted on keeping physical files. Alistair built firewalls and traced digital breadcrumbs. Serafina became the heart of the operation, the source of truth they both orbited. Marcus relentlessly cross-examined her, poking holes in her story, forcing her to recall every minor detail, every conversation. It was a grueling process, but through it, a grudging respect grew between the cynical journalist and the fugitive scientist. Their first goal was to independently verify Omnigen's intent. "We need more than just your data," Marcus explained, pinning a shipping manifest to the corkboard. "We need to catch them in the act." Using a backdoor into the Federal Aviation Administration's database, a source he'd cultivated for years, Marcus began cross-referencing Omnigen's private flight logs with their internal shipping manifests, which Serafina helped him access from the data she'd stolen. For days, they found nothing but routine corporate travel and supply shipments. Then they found it. "Here," Marcus said, his voice tight with excitement. "A flight scheduled in 2 weeks. A research transport jet destination, a private medical facility in the Carpathian Mountains in a small, politically unstable nation. The manifest lists the cargo as cryogenic cell cultures." At the same time, Serafina, working on a separate terminal, finally broke through the last layer of encryption on a file that had been nagging at her. It was labeled simply Project Chimera Final Assessment. It wasn't research data. It was a series of epidemiological projections, a simulation of a viral outbreak in a small, isolated mountain population with a specific genetic heritage. She looked up from her screen, her face ashen. "Alistair, Marcus, get over here." She projected the simulation onto the main screen. It showed a map of a small valley, a cluster of villages. A red bloom started at a single point and spread with horrifying speed. The model predicted a 98% infection rate within 72 hours of initial aerosol dispersal. Marcus brought up the flight plan for the Omnigen jet on the adjacent screen. The destination coordinates on the flight plan and the epicenter of the simulated outbreak were the same. A cold, heavy silence fell over the room. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of unimaginable evil. Marcus, the man who had reported on wars, corruption, and genocide, looked physically ill. He sank into his chair, his face pale. "My God," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "It's not a sale, it's a live demonstration. They're going to release the weaponized virus on those villages to prove to a buyer what it can do." He looked at the other two, his cynical mask gone, replaced by pure horror. "This is an auction, and the price of admission is a massacre." The ticking clock had begun. They had 13 days. The discovery of Project Chimera shifted the atmosphere in Marcus's basement from one of clandestine excitement to a grim, oppressive urgency. The ticking clock was a palpable presence in the room, each second a hammer blow against their dwindling hopes. It was this pressure that made Marcus careless. The lead came through one of his most trusted, encrypted channels, a supposed whistleblower, deep within Omnigen's logistics division. The source claimed to have physical copies of the complete unredacted flight and cargo manifests for the Chimera shipment. He wanted to meet, offering the documents in exchange for safe passage out of the city. "It's a trap," Alistair said immediately, his eyes not leaving the monitor where the message was displayed. "Silas is not an idiot. He knows we're digging. He's leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, and he's waiting for one of us to be hungry enough to follow." "Maybe," Marcus countered, pacing the confined space, his energy too large for the room. "Or maybe it's a panicked employee who's developed a conscience. It happens. This is how stories like this are broken, Alistair. Not by sitting in a basement playing with firewalls, but by meeting a source in a dark alley with your gut as your only guide. I have to go." "He's right," Serafina added, her voice quiet. "We need physical evidence. My data can be dismissed as a fabrication. A signed manifest is harder to deny." Alistair looked at their determined faces. He saw the logic, but his training screamed that it was wrong. It was too clean, too easy. If you go with comms and you pull out at the first sign of anything irregular. No heroics, Marcus. The mission is more important than the story. Marcus gave a wry smile. To a soldier, maybe. To a journalist, the story is the mission. The meeting point was a container yard by the industrial canal, a desolate, windswept place where the city's refuse met the black, oily water. Marcus arrived just after midnight, the salt-laced wind whipping at his trench coat. The yard was a maze of rusting steel boxes, a perfect place for an ambush. He felt a familiar thrill, the dangerous addiction of the chase that had defined his life. He waited. The appointed time came and went. The only sound was the groaning of metal and the cry of gulls. The unease that had been a low hum in the back of his mind grew into a blaring alarm. He had just turned to leave when a floodlight high on a crane snapped on, pinning him in a brutal white glare. Figures emerged from between the containers, moving with a silent, coordinated efficiency. They were not common thugs. They were professional, dressed in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas. Marcus didn't even have time to reach for the panic button in his pocket. A hand clamped over his mouth and a sharp, stinging pain bloomed in his neck. The world dissolved into a dizzying black vortex. His last conscious thought was of Alistair's warning, a bitter echo in the sudden, terrifying silence. The message to Alistair was not a demand, but a declaration of victory. The main screen in the basement flickered to life, bypassing all of Alistair's firewalls. It showed a live feed from a brightly lit, sterile room. Marcus was strapped to a steel chair, his face bruised and swollen, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. He was conscious, his defiant eyes glaring into the camera. Silas Thorne stepped into the frame, perfectly calm, his suit immaculate. He looked directly into the camera as if making eye contact with Alistair himself. "Good evening, Doctor." Silas said, his voice smooth as polished glass. "A complication has arisen in my efforts to secure my company's assets. Mr. Vance was unfortunately caught in the crossfire. A classic case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time." He gave a thin reptilian smile. "I am prepared to overlook his trespasses in exchange for your full cooperation. Dr. Volkov, the Alpha strain, and all associated data. You have 6 hours to deliver them to the location I am transmitting to you now. After that, Mr. Vance's continued health can no longer be guaranteed. I do hope you'll make the sensible choice." The feed cut out, replaced by a set of coordinates. "I have to go," Serafina said instantly, her face a mask of horror and guilt. "He was captured because of me. This is my fault." "No." Alistair's voice was flat, cold, and absolute. He was already at his terminal, his fingers a blur across the keyboard, analyzing the residual data from the video stream. The haunted doctor was gone, replaced completely by the hardened field commander. "This is not a negotiation. It is a tactical maneuver. He thinks he is in control. We will correct that assumption." He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a cold fire she had never seen before. "Men like Silas don't honor deals. They use them to set a second trap. Giving him what he wants would be a death sentence for all of us. We are going to get him back." The location was a decommissioned pharmaceutical plant on the city's southern outskirts, an Omnigen property officially listed as dormant. Using Serafina's knowledge of corporate network architecture and Alistair's hacking skills, they found a blind spot. The plant was a black site. "Here," Serafina said, pointing to a schematic she'd pulled from Omnigen's own servers. "This is the old cryo storage wing. It's isolated from the main facility with its own power grid and ventilation. It's the perfect place to hold someone off the books." Their plan was desperate, born of necessity. Alistair gathered a small bag of equipment, not weapons of war, but tools of disruption. A high-yield EMP device, smoke grenades, and a medical kit stocked for trauma. Serafina, her hands shaking, but her resolve firm, loaded a portable terminal with a series of viral code snippets designed to disable Omnigen's internal security systems. She was not a soldier, but she would fight with the weapons she knew. They breached the perimeter fence under the cover of a passing freight train. The infiltration was a tense ballet of stealth and timing. Alistair moved through the shadows with a lethal grace, a ghost from a past he could never truly escape. Serafina, close behind him, worked on her terminal, her code. A silent key unlocking doors and looping camera feeds. They found Marcus in a sterile observation room on the sublevel, just as Serafina had predicted. He was alone, but Alistair knew there were at least 4 guards in the adjacent monitoring station. "Stay here," he whispered to Serafina. "When I give the signal, kill the lights and lock the door to the monitoring station. Give me 30 seconds. He moved to the door of the observation room. He took a deep breath, and for a moment the face of the soldier he couldn't save flashed in his mind. Not again, he thought. He gave Serafina a sharp nod. The world plunged into absolute darkness. A split second later, the EMP blast sent a wave of energy through the wing, frying every non-shielded electronic device. Alistair burst through the door as the guards in the monitoring station were momentarily blinded and deafened. The fight was short, brutal, and efficient. He moved through the darkness with a predator's instinct, using the chaos he had created. There were sounds of struggle, a choked cry, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. When the emergency lights flickered on 30 seconds later, the 4 guards were unconscious on the floor, neutralized with swift, incapacitating blows. Alistair cut Marcus free. "Can you walk?" "I think so," Marcus groaned, clutching his ribs. They were very persuasive. An alarm began to blare, a loud, piercing shriek. Their time was up. "Let's go," Alistair commanded. Their escape was a chaotic scramble through the facility's corridors. They were no longer ghosts. They were intruders, and the entire facility was now awake and hunting them. As they rounded a corner, they ran straight into another team of guards. A firefight erupted, the concussive blasts of stun grenades echoing in the enclosed space. Serafina stumbled, trying to shield the data slate that held their only copy of the Chimera simulation. A guard lunged for her. Alistair intercepted him, but in the struggle, Serafina was knocked to the ground. She heard a sickening crack as the data slate flung from her grasp slammed against a steel support beam. "Leave it!" Alistair yelled, pulling her to her feet and shoving her toward an exit. They burst out into the rainy night, piling into the vehicle Alistair had hidden nearby, and speeding away as the facility behind them erupted in a hornet's nest of activity. They didn't stop until they were miles away, hidden in the anonymity of a multi-level parking garage. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the grim reality of their situation. Alistair was tending to a deep gash on Marcus's arm. The journalist was battered but alive. They had won. But then Serafina pulled the data slate from her bag. The screen was a spiderweb of cracks, dark and lifeless. The casing was split, the delicate circuitry within exposed and shattered. It was completely destroyed. She stared at the dead piece of technology, the sum of her life's work, their most powerful weapon against Omnigen, now just a piece of useless junk. They had rescued their friend, but in doing so, they had lost the very evidence that could save the world. The price of one man's life had been their last best hope. The new safe house was a sterile, soulless corporate apartment in a glass tower that looked like 1,000 others. It had none of the fortress-like security of the last place, nor the chaotic lived-in energy of Marcus's basement. It was a place of transit, a ghost's way station, and it perfectly mirrored the crushing sense of defeat that had settled over them. For hours, the only sounds were the distant wail of city sirens and the soft rustle of Alistair changing the bandages on Marcus's arm. The journalist was asleep on the sofa, his face a pale, bruised mask, his breathing shallow. Alara and Leo were huddled in the single bedroom, the door closed, a silent, fragile pact of mutual comfort. Alistair and Serafina occupied the main room, separated by a chasm of unspoken failure. He stood by the window, a rigid silhouette against the city's indifferent lights. She sat on the floor, the 2 halves of the shattered data slate resting in her lap like the pieces of a broken tombstone. Her life's work, their only weapon, was now just so much plastic and silicon. She was the first to break the silence, her voice a dry, rasping whisper. "It's over. It's all for nothing." She looked up at him, her eyes hollowed out by despair. He was right. Silas was right. He said he doesn't tolerate complications, and we were just a complication. He swept us aside. Her voice broke. "I led us all into this. I failed. I failed my children. I failed Marcus. And I failed you." Alistair didn't turn from the window. He had heard those words before in the echo chamber of his own mind for 5 long years. Her self-recrimination was a familiar poison. Instead of offering a platitude, he finally gave voice to the ghost that had haunted him for so long. His name was Corporal David Reyes. He said, his voice quiet, distant, as if coming from another room, another lifetime. He was 22 years old, a joker. He had a picture of his high school sweetheart taped to the inside of his helmet. He was brought into my field hospital after an IED blast. Shrapnel had shredded everything from the waist down. Everyone else in the triage tent knew he was gone. The medics, the nurses, they saw an impossible case, a lost cause. He finally turned from the window to look at her. His face was a mask of old, settled grief. But I was Dr. Finch, the best, the surgeon who could work miracles. I saw a challenge. I refused to let him die. I kept him on my operating table for 11 hours. I transfused more than his body's own volume in blood. I ignored the other wounded soldiers who I might have saved because I was arrogant. I was so sure my skill could bend the universe to my will. He walked over and sank down onto the edge of a sterile armchair across from her. I remember the exact moment I failed. My hands were deep inside his chest trying to clamp a hemorrhaging artery, and I felt his heart beat its last against my knuckles. It just stopped. The silence after the frenzy of the monitors and the shouting. It was the loudest thing I've ever heard. He looked at his own hands, seeing not the clean, steady hands of a wealthy recluse, but hands stained with a failure he could never wash away. I didn't just lose a patient that day, Serafina. I lost my faith. Not in God, but in myself. I lost the arrogant belief that I could fix what was broken. That's why I hid. That's why I built my tower. It's easier to feel nothing at all than it is to feel that. His confession, raw and unvarnished, created a space in the air between them, a sanctuary of shared brokenness. Serafina looked at this man who had been her stoic protector, her commander, and for the first time she saw the profound wound he carried. His vulnerability was an invitation, and she accepted. Tears she hadn't realized she'd been holding back began to stream down her face. "You think your failure was arrogance?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Every time I look at Leo, every time he struggles for breath, I see my own pride. I was so in love with my own creation, so sure I could control it, so certain I was smarter than all the men in suits at Omnigen. I was so focused on saving the world with my miracle." She gestured to the broken slate. "My pride is what made me careless that day in the lab. My pride is what's rewriting my son's DNA. I ran from Omnigen to keep a weapon out of their hands, but I couldn't even protect my own child from me. I gave him a disease for which I hold the only cure, a cure I can no longer administer, because I wasn't strong enough or smart enough to protect it." They were no longer the brilliant scientist and the legendary surgeon. They were just two people stripped bare of their titles and defenses, admitting to the failures that had defined them. The raw shared truth of it was more intimate than any touch. Alistair moved from the chair to the floor, sitting across from her. He gently took the broken pieces of the slate from her lap and set them aside. Then he reached out and took her hands. They were cold, trembling. "We are not defined by our worst day, Serafina," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We are not the sum of our failures. We are defined by the choice we make the morning after, the choice to stand up again." "But how?" she whispered. "We have nothing left. No proof, no allies who can help us. The clock is still ticking for those people in the mountains and for Leo." "I don't know how yet," he admitted. "But I know we won't find the answer if we let the ghosts win." He looked into her tear-filled eyes, and she saw in his a flicker of the man he used to be, the healer returning from exile. "You carry guilt for Leo. I carry guilt for Reyes. We can either let those burdens anchor us to the past, or we can use them as fuel. We fight for Leo. We fight for the memory of Reyes. We fight for all the people who can't." In that moment of shared catharsis, the simmering attraction that had been an undercurrent to their alliance finally broke the surface. It was not a sudden passion, but a deep, powerful recognition of a kindred soul. He had seen her at her most desperate, and she had now seen him at his most broken. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She met him halfway. Their first kiss was not hungry or demanding. It was a quiet, desperate, and beautiful collision of solace and strength. It was the taste of salt from her tears and the promise of a shared dawn. It was an acknowledgement that even in the heart of the storm, in the wreckage of their best-laid plans, they had found something unbreakable. They stayed like that for a long time, a quiet embrace in a sterile room, two solitary islands that had finally found an archipelago. The broken slate lay forgotten on the floor. It had only ever been a vessel for the truth. Serafina finally pulled back slightly, her hand resting on his cheek. "They destroyed the data. Silas took our proof." Alistair looked at her, his gaze steady and clear, his hand covering hers. "He destroyed a piece of technology, Sarah. He didn't destroy the source." He gently tapped her temple. "The formula, the research, the proof of their intent. It's all still in there. Silas thinks he destroyed our weapon." He gave a small, weary smile, the first she had seen from him that was genuine. "He's wrong. You are the weapon, and I am done running from the fight." Hope, they discovered, was not a feeling. It was a decision. In the sterile quiet of the corporate apartment with their best weapon shattered on the floor, they made a choice. They would not be victims of Silas Thorne's narrative. They would become the authors of his downfall. It was Marcus propped up on the sofa with his arm in a sling who defined their new strategy. "We've been playing defense." He rasped, his voice raw but resolute, reacting to his moves, trying to leak the truth from the shadows. "That game is over. You can't leak a story when the world has already decided you're the villain. You have to become the story. You have to hijack the stage live in front of the whole world and give them a truth so undeniable they can't look away." The stage, they quickly determined, was the upcoming Global Biotech Summit held in their very own Veridia city. And the star of the show was to be Jonathan Croft, the charismatic silver-haired CEO of Omnigen, who was scheduled to give the closing keynote address. The plan they concocted was audacious, bordering on insane. It was no longer a simple matter of leaking data. It was a high-stakes, real-time infiltration, a heist where the prize was not gold but the global narrative. "I can reconstruct the Chimera simulation," Serafina said, a new hard light in her eyes. The grief had been burned away, leaving behind pure, unyielding resolve. "From my notes from memory, I can create a presentation file that shows exactly what they plan to do. And I," Marcus added, "can have a consortium of the most respected, untouchable journalists in the world waiting for my signal. The moment your file goes live, they bypass the official summit feed and broadcast it globally. Omnigen can pull the plug on their own event, but they can't pull the plug on the entire internet." "That leaves the hardest part," Alistair said, looking at Serafina. "Getting the file onto their system. The keynote presentation will be loaded onto a secure air-gapped server in the convention center's primary control room. Security will be absolute. Getting to it will be next to impossible." "Then I'll do the impossible," Serafina stated, her voice unwavering. "I designed the underlying architecture for Omnigen's data security protocols. I know their weaknesses because I created them." Over the next 5 days, they worked with a feverish, unified focus. Alistair converted the sterile apartment into a command center. He procured forged credentials for Serafina Dr. Lena Petrova, a respected but reclusive biochemist from a small, neutral European nation. He secured a hotel suite directly overlooking the convention center, a perfect perch for a digital sniper. Serafina worked tirelessly, her mind a whirlwind of code and memory, rebuilding the horrifying simulation of Project Chimera from scratch. Marcus, meanwhile, made a series of cryptic coded calls, activating a network of favors and alliances built over a 30-year career. The final piece of the puzzle was the most dangerous. "The control room is behind a biometric locked door," Alistair explained, pointing to a schematic on the screen. "There are always 2 guards posted there. We can't use force. We need a diversion. Something low-tech, believable, and perfectly timed to draw one of them away for at least 90 seconds. He looked at Alara, who had been listening silently, her expression serious beyond her years. He hated what he was about to ask, but he saw the same determined fire in her eyes that he'd seen in her mother's. He explained the plan. A specific guard, a man known to have a short temper and a pristine uniform, would be her target. A large, sticky, brightly colored soda, accidentally, spilled at a precise moment. A child's clumsy mistake. "I can do it," Alara said immediately, her voice small but firm. "For Leo, and for Mama." Serafina started to protest, but Alistair put a hand on her arm. "She's the only one they won't see as a threat. She is our perfect ghost." The day of the summit arrived, a day of brilliant sunshine that seemed to mock the dark, coiled tension in their hearts. The Veridia Convention Center was a gleaming cathedral of glass and steel, swarming with the world's scientific and corporate elite. Security was suffocating. Serafina moved through the crowd, a vision of academic elegance in a tailored suit, her forged ID badge hanging from her neck. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face was a mask of calm composure. Alistair's voice was a steady, low murmur in the microscopic communicator in her ear. "You're doing fine, Lena. Blend with the crowd. Head toward the reception hall." From his hotel room, Alistair had a god's-eye view. He had compromised the center's security network, a silent predator moving through their digital corridors. On his screens, he saw 100 different camera feeds, a mosaic of their battlefield. Marcus was already in the press gallery, looking like just another rumpled journalist, but in his pocket was a satellite phone that connected him to a global network ready to unleash a firestorm. Ilara and Leo were with a trusted associate of Marcus's, a retired schoolteacher, posing as a family attending the public exhibition hall. Ilara held a large cup of bright orange soda waiting. "The CEO is taking the stage in 10 minutes. Alistair's voice came in Serafina's ear. "It's time. I'm guiding you through the service corridors. Move now." Serafina slipped into a hallway marked "Staff Only." The glamour of the summit fell away, replaced by the sterile functionality of concrete and steel pipes. "2 guards at the end of the hall by the elevators," Alistair reported. "Non-hostile. Wait for the distraction." In the bustling exhibition hall, the schoolteacher gently nudged Ilara. "It's time, sweetie." Ilara walked with a determined purpose toward the corridor leading to the press gallery, the same corridor the target guard used to take his breaks. She saw him, a tall, imposing man with a perfectly pressed uniform. Taking a deep breath, she feigned a trip, lurching forward and sending the entire contents of the orange soda splashing across the guard's pristine trousers and polished shoes. The man roared in frustration. The scene was perfectly chaotically believable. As he dragged a crying Ilara towards a supervisor's office to file a report, the second guard, his partner, was momentarily distracted by the commotion. That was all Alistair needed. "The door is clear, Sarah. You have 90 seconds. Go." Serafina moved, her heart pounding. The biometric lock was Omnigen tech. She placed a small decryption device over the scanner, and after a tense 3 seconds, the light turned green. She slipped inside the control room. It was a cold, dark space humming with the power of servers, the only light coming from a bank of monitors. She found the keynote presentation console, inserted a thumb drive, and began the upload. A progress bar appeared. 20%, 40%. Meanwhile, Silas Thorne, observing the security grid from a mobile command post backstage, saw the incident with the child. It was trivial. But then he saw the second guard's attention diverted. It was a tiny tear in the perfect fabric of his security, and his predator's instinct screamed. He started moving toward the control room, his pace quickening. "Sarah, you have company." Alistair's voice was urgent in her ear. "Silas is heading your way. Status: IKX. 70%. I need more time." "I'll buy you what I can," Alistair said. His fingers flew across his keyboard. He triggered a fire alarm in the west wing of the center, a high-priority alert that would demand the attention of the head of security. Silas's communicator buzzed. He saw the fire alarm. For a crucial second, he hesitated, torn between a real major security breach and a nagging gut feeling. He chose the gut feeling. He kept moving toward the control room. Upload complete. Serafina ripped the drive out, her hands shaking. She locked the console with a new password, a final defiant act. She turned and opened the door, coming face to face with Silas Thorne. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed into slits of pure fury. "Volkov." She didn't run. She didn't scream. She met his gaze, and for the first time she felt no fear of him. "It's too late, Silas." He lunged for her, his hand reaching to grab her arm. But at that exact moment, the voice of Jonathan Croft boomed from the speakers throughout the convention center. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, a look at the bright future of Omnigen." Silas froze, his eyes darting to a monitor in the hallway. On the main stage, the massive screen behind the CEO flickered. But instead of the glossy corporate video, it showed a map of a remote mountain valley. A single red dot appeared, and then began to bloom, spreading like a bloodstain, consuming the tiny villages in its path. A collective gasp, a wave of confusion and horror rippled through the auditorium. In the press gallery, Marcus Vance saw the feed switch. He spoke a single word into his satellite phone. "Go." Across the world, the story broke. Back in the service corridor, Silas stared at the screen in horror, his grip on Serafina forgotten. She pulled her arm away and began to walk, not running but striding with a calm, righteous purpose toward the light of the main stage, leaving him standing alone in the shadows with the ruins of his perfect plan. For a stunned, silent moment, the world watched the horrifying bloom of the Chimera simulation spread across the screen behind the CEO of Omnigen. The image was a silent digital scream, a prophecy of a massacre told in cold clinical data. Then Serafina Volkov walked onto the stage. Security personnel surged forward, but they were too late. Marcus's plan had accounted for them. A phalanx of journalists, alerted by him just moments before, broke from the press gallery and swarmed the stage, their cameras flashing like 100 tiny lightning storms. They formed a protective, chaotic barrier of lenses and microphones around Serafina. She was no longer a fugitive. She was the most important story in the world. She reached the podium and took the microphone from the stunned CEO's hand. Her voice amplified throughout the auditorium and broadcast live to millions was not the voice of a terrorist or a madwoman. It was clear, steady and resonant with the unassailable power of truth. "My name is Dr. Serafina Volkov," she began, and a hush fell over the room. "For the last 2 years, I have been a ghost, hunted by the man standing beside me and his head of security, Silas Thorne. They have labeled me a threat because I refused to let my life's work, a protocol designed to heal the incurable, be turned into a weapon of mass extinction." She pointed to the horrifying simulation still playing on the screen. "This is not a theoretical model. This is a field test. A live demonstration scheduled to be carried out in 13 days on the innocent people of the Carpathian Valley to secure a sale to the highest bidder. Omnigen doesn't want to cure the world. They want to hold it hostage." Her words were a torpedo tearing through the hull of Omnigen's reputation. In the back of the auditorium, federal agents alerted by Marcus's prearranged information moved quietly and efficiently through the panicked crowd. They apprehended a stunned Jonathan Croft at the podium and intercepted Silas Thorne as he tried to slip away through a service exit. The hunt was finally over. 6 months later, the autumn sun streamed through the large windows of a bustling clinic in Veridia City's most neglected district. The air smelled not of decay, but of fresh paint, antiseptic, and brewing coffee. The clinic was not grand, but it was state-of-the-art, and on the frosted glass door the simple inscription read, "The Reyes Community Health Initiative." Inside, Dr. Alistair Finch was kneeling talking to a small girl with a cast on her arm. He was smiling, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. The haunted, reclusive ghost of the penthouse was gone, replaced by a man who had found his purpose not in isolation, but in service. His fortune was no longer a shield, but a tool. He was a healer again, and in healing the broken bodies of his cities forgotten, he was slowly, surely healing himself. Far from the city, in a quiet office in Geneva, Serafina sat at the head of a long table addressing an international ethics committee via video conference. She was no longer running. She was now a guiding force, a powerful voice ensuring that the Seraphim protocol, which had been secured and placed under the control of a global health consortium, would be used only for its intended purpose to heal. Her intellect, once a tool for survival, was now a shield for all of humanity. Their new life was in a modest house with a small, sun-filled garden, a world away from both the sterile penthouse and the derelict warehouse. It was a place defined not by fear or luxury, but by warmth. Here, Leo, his condition stabilized and steadily improving thanks to a carefully administered treatment derived from his mother's work, chased butterflies across the grass. His laughter was the sound of their victory. And here on a bright Saturday afternoon, Alara, now a thriving middle schooler with a passion for art, approached Alistair as he sat on the porch steps watching the scene. She held a sketchbook in her hands. "I made something for you," she said, her voice soft. She handed him the book. It was open to a new drawing. It wasn't a complex piece, but it was rendered with a child's profound, honest love. It showed 4 stick figures, a tall man, a woman with flowing hair, a small, brave girl, and a laughing little boy, all holding hands under a brightly shining sun. At the top she had written in careful letters, "Our family." Alistair felt a familiar tightening in his throat, but this time it was not from grief, but from an overwhelming, heart-filling joy. "I wanted to pay you back," Alara said, looking up at him, her eyes shining with the same fierce sincerity he remembered from that first night in his clinic. "For the medicine, for everything. I promised I would." Alistair looked from the drawing to the face of the girl who had broken into his life and saved him from himself. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. "You paid me back the moment you trusted me, Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He smiled, a true and lasting smile. "But what you've given me, what we've all built here, this is so much more than a debt repaid." He pulled her into a gentle hug. The drawing of their family pressed between them. "You paid it forward." And in the quiet peace of their garden under a clear and boundless sky, the promise was finally truly kept. The story of Alistair and Serafina is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds do not have to define our destiny. It teaches us that true redemption is not found in hiding from our past failures, but in finding the courage to face the present and fight for a better future. Their journey shows that the greatest strength is not in vulnerability, but the willingness to be vulnerable, to trust, and to connect. True wealth is not measured in dollars or patents, but in the purpose we find and the lives we touch. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We believe that stories are more than just entertainment. They are a way to explore the depths of the human heart and the resilience of the human spirit. If this story resonated with you, we would be deeply grateful if you would show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It is your encouragement that allows us to continue searching for and sharing these meaningful narratives. We wish you peace, and we wish you strength on your own journey.